Everyone, thanks for stopping by and seeing what I'm up to. My name is Silky Feather, and you can call me Silky. Continuing on our book, Growing Marijuana. It is by Clydebank Alternative, narrated by Amy Baron Solensky. On we go.
Chapter 3. Finding a suitable location. Of course, knowing how to grow your cannabis plants won't do you much good if you have nowhere to grow them. Finding a suitable location is one of the earliest and most critical decisions that a grower must make. This means putting a lot of thought into your selection and taking many factors into account. This chapter focuses on how much space your plants need indoors and outdoors, and how many plants you should grow to reach your goal. When selecting a location for your growing operation, knowing the size or target size of your crop is paramount. This applies to growing both outdoors and indoors. If you as a grower want to raise a crop of 1,000 plants, you should be aware that this simply can't be done in a broom closet. Ask yourself these questions. How many plants do I want to grow? Knowing how many plants you want to grow may be a bit like putting the chicken before the egg, but it is important to have a plan. You know why you're choosing to grow marijuana, whether to build a massive cash-generating farm or keep a pair of plants in the closet for recreational use on the weekends, and anything in between. If you're planning on expanding or you intend to eventually have a large operation, keep scalability in mind. Every new project should consider scalability, and in the world of business, it is a good practice to assume that your competition is doing everything right. If your competition is considering scalability, then you should be too. Scalability is the operation's ability to grow effectively as demand and resources increase. Ignoring how to scale your operation when it is still at the foundational level can cause some serious problems down the road. Remember, Rome wasn't built in a day. It must have taken at least 2 or 3. Kidding aside, if you're not planning for expansion, you could end up in over your head. For the prospective new grower, this means selecting a location that is much larger than your new operation currently warrants. A space that you can grow into, so to speak. If you select a location that will only support 10 plants because that's how many you can raise by yourself, that's fine if you want to have 10 plants. But if you have aspirations of expansion, finding a larger space early will mean that once you have the capital, you can turn the 10 into 30 or 60 depending on the space you have. Not everyone has the luxury of a selection of easy-to-conceal and spacious growing locations, and that means that you will have to mold your plans to fit your situation. Such is business and such is life. As they say in the military, no plan survives contact with the enemy. Don't just ask yourself this first question. Read this entire book and come back to the process of location selection, taking into account all of the factors and information you have at your disposal when making your decision. Realistically, experts agree that small operations should start with 2 to 6 plants. 4 plants are much easier to care for than 16, and when growers are attempting to grow in areas where cultivation is illegal, the lower the number of plants attached to your name, the better off you will be if you are caught. For indoor growers, yields are better when fewer plants rely on each light source, and for outdoor growers, there is a minimum spacing between plants to produce ideal results. The monetary incentive to pack plants into a space may be attractive, but overcrowding will reduce yields. Using a target income. Financial planners will tell you that the way to build a business or a financial plan is to set a goal of income and build your business around that goal. If that's the route you want to take, my advice is start with a reasonable goal. Assess the costs of setting up your operation and what your potential profit will be. A key metric in this decision is knowing how much product you can expect to get from a single plant. As you might expect, the answer varies, but we'll take a look at some industry standards. For those electing to grow outdoors, growers can expect yields of up to 500 grams or 17.5 ounces per plant. That is under ideal conditions, mind you, and under the care of an experienced grower. Remember, no plant survives contact with the enemy. You will only get 500 grams per plant if no one steals any of your crop, your plants don't suffer from disease or pests, and you can provide them with adequate sunlight, water, and nutrients. To bring yourself closer to the 500-gram yield, we'll discuss growing methods and strategies in later chapters. For those electing to grow indoors, yields can vary wildly with the setup of your growing operation. Indoors, lights are key. An experienced grower can expect to produce nearly a gram of product per watt of light. Again, this is under ideal conditions and if everything goes according to plan. Too many plants relying on a single light will result in the same overcrowding issues that outdoor growers will face. Can you expect 400 grams of product from a 400-watt light? 600 grams from a 600-watt light? The answer, more or less, yes. The yield per plant varies significantly when growing indoors, and the grams per watts ratio is an average for the entire operation. If you grow 4 plants under a 600-watt light, you can expect to see about 150 grams per plant, meaning that your production overall will be about 600 grams. If you pack the plants under that same light, the yield per plant will be lower, but the total will still be around 600 grams. How do you translate this information into a rough idea of how many plants you want to grow? If you have a target yield and you know how much money you can produce from a single gram, then you are well on your way. Know what selling structure you'll be using, wholesale or end user. If you sell to people who in turn sell, they need to be able to make a profit from individual sales, hence wholesale pricing. You can sell large amounts of product and walk away with cash in hand. If you elect to sell directly to consumers, there are more expenses incurred and you will need many more transactions to turn your harvest into cash. Once you have determined how much money you can make per gram and how many grams you need to hit your target income, subtract the costs of equipment and growing and the result is a basic projection of income. Generally speaking, it makes more sense to produce more buds per plant on fewer plants because this saves on costs. But it also means that your entire crop is at risk in the event of disease, theft, power outages, or just about any other catastrophe you can dream up. So if you only need to sell 2,000 grams to hit your target income, think about your yield per plant. That's 4 outdoor plants for an expert, but I'd recommend doing it with 6 or 7 until you get the hang of things. I doubt you'll complain if there's a surplus. Or, that's 2,000 watts of light indoors. 2,000 watts can be organized as 2 1,000-watt lights, 10 200-watt lights, and so on. Remember, growers can effectively grow many plants under one light, but as the number of plants increases, the yield per plant decreases. Fewer plants mean higher yield per plant and lower costs, but higher risk to the crop. If you have 4 plants and lose 1, that means roughly 25% of your harvest is gone. More plants mean higher costs and more work. There's less yield per plant, but the loss of a single plant is a lower hit to your harvest. The choice is yours. How tall will they be? Outdoor growers have less to worry about in this arena, but as everyone knows, plants grow upwards. When considering the space that a crop will occupy, you must also consider the vertical space into which it will grow. The strains you select have a known average height, so take this into consideration. The ballpark figure is that cannabis plants can vary between heights of only a few feet tall to roughly 10 feet in height.
Holy.
The largest factor that impacts this is whether your strain is a sativa or indica. Remember that the former is the taller of the two and the latter is shorter. Sure, this means don't grow marijuana in the low-ceilinged rooms of your house, but also consider this. Are you growing on tables or on the floor? Tables are handy for care when the plants are still small, but if you have a basement operation, the standard height for a basement ceiling is a minimum of 7 feet. If your plants are on 4-foot tables and grow more than 3 feet tall, you'll be left with squashed and stunted plants. Have a plan in place if you'll need to transition from tables to floor. The height of the plants is not only a concern for growing space, but it can potentially be a concealment concern as well. When planning the concealment of your growing operation, consider the final height of the plant. If your concealment will hide a 10-foot tall cannabis plant, it will hide a 3-foot tall one. The inverse is not necessarily true. How much space will that number of plants occupy? Now you know how many plants you want and how tall they'll be. How much space do you need? Think three-dimensionally because your plants could potentially be 10 feet tall if you plan on growing a sativa strain. The term that describes how closely your cannabis plants are packed is planting density. The density of your plants can vary based on strain, so as a result, a lot of general guidelines are offered. Experts agree that effective density can be a stumbling point for new operations because it is a balance between several different metrics. When growing indoors, growers want to get the most out of each watt of light and square inch of space.
Excuse me.
Electricity isn't free, and the high-intensity lights that growers use are energy hogs. Having a high planting density means that you will get the most bang for your buck, so to speak, when it comes to not wasting precious kilowatt hours, the way your energy company measures your consumption of electricity. Having too high of a planting density means that while your harvest weight will come in at target, the actual quality of the buds will be lower. Whether you personally use marijuana or not, it should be fairly obvious that substandard marijuana is bad for business. What works best for one strain won't necessarily work as well for another, but a good rule of thumb is to keep 6 strong branches per linear square foot of growing light. The light output of different lamps will vary, but the manufacturer will always be able to provide you with an effective discharge range if it's not printed on the packaging. This guideline is for the production of the highest quality product, and small compromises in quality can be made in the interest of increased quantity and cost effectiveness. The bottom line is that no matter how many general guidelines you read, there is simply too much variation from strain to strain for any single guideline to be accurate for your operation. Your seed dealer will be able to recommend an approximate planting density for your strain. Can I effectively care for that number of plants? As you become a more skilled and experienced grower, the level of care that you provide for your plants will increase. We cover the basics in this book, but the next volume, Growing Marijuana Mastery, gets into some more in-depth methods to squeeze every last possible drop of production out of your plants. When starting out, your care and maintenance duties will be fairly straightforward. When you become more adept, the job of growing can become much more labor-intensive. There is no formula to determine how much time of your day will be devoted to caring for your cannabis plants. It should be fairly obvious that caring for fewer plants is much easier than caring for a bunch of plants that you maintain, all the way up to an entire field of marijuana with an entire team of growers. As you read on and learn more about the specifics of plant care, think about each of these activities, its level of difficulty, and the amount of time that you have available, or will make available, to develop your growing operation. After all, the best kind of decision is an informed one. Should I grow indoors or outdoors? The answer to this question is up to you, but before you decide, there are some aspects of cannabis growing that you should consider. The first and foremost piece of information that you should consider is the level of concealment you wish to implement. It's simply easier to hide your growing operation indoors and away from prying eyes. That being said, in some instances, growers prefer to grow outdoors in an effort to gain some measure of plausible deniability. As I have said, I am no lawyer, but I wouldn't bet on that keeping someone out of jail. Another benefit to growing indoors is the level of control it affords the grower. When growing outdoors, your plants are outdoors. They're subject to the weather, the elements, soil conditions, insects, and you name it. Getting a more consistent harvest and plentiful harvest out of outdoor crops can be harder, especially for the novice grower. And it can expose your growing operation to risk in the form of loss or discovery. When working with cannabis, indoor growers don't have to worry about a cloudy day affecting their harvests, acid rain stunting their plants, or depleted soil starving their crops. All of these examples are, of course, worst-case scenarios, but you get the idea. The reality is that cannabis is a versatile and hardy plant, so it is not as susceptible to environmental stressors as other plants are. But your growing operation is a business. You're not trying to raise plants that simply survive. You want productive plants that will thrive. The specifics of running an indoor growing operation are covered later in this book. Again, keep all of these questions in mind throughout the next several chapters. Answering these questions will ensure that once your operation is functional, you can hit the ground running and avoid costly and time-consuming mistakes.
And that's where we're going to pause for today. Thanks for stopping by. Hit that like and hit that subscribe button today so you can continue on learning how to grow marijuana. Thanks again. This is Silky Feather signing off. Be kind to one another. Life is too short.